Welcome back to another episode of the Solex Resurrection. In today's episode, we're going to try and reassemble the engine. But first, let's take apart this bearing from the crankshaft and take the bearing out of this housing here. So let's start with the easy one. This should be the easiest. Just take off these two nuts and then a cap should be pulled off, and then you should be able to heat the aluminium, and then you should be able to tap the bearing out. So let's start with that and maybe give it a little clean as well, so it works a bit nicer. There we go, that's the cap. Ooh, quite dirty. And that's the bearing. I hope we'll be able to get this out, because I just realized there is no space to tap on the back of the bearing. I think we'll have to be creative. Let's first start with heating the housing. My torch is stuck because of the cold. I can't turn it higher. Let's give it a shot. If I can close my torch. Oh, come on. It's leaking. I think it's closed now. Oh, that came out fairly easy. Oh, there we go. Well, I wasn't really expecting that. But hey, I'm not complaining. So taking this bearing out was pretty easy. I thought it would be a lot harder, but luckily it wasn't. So what I think I'm going to do is take off the points ignition system and all the rest of the bits and bobs and put it in the parts washer, so we can give this thing a good clean. Next up is getting this bearing off the crankshaft. It looks like it already has come a small way, but let's heat it up and hopefully get it off. Let's try heating it up. Don't tell me this thing is broken. I've always hated this system, but until now it has always worked. Just got back from the store, got a new torch, so we're back in business. So let's try to get this bearing off. Let's see what we can do. That's another bearing cleared. So we can start working on cleaning this crankshaft up and go from there. My fresh parts arrived, and I've also got a racing cylinder. As you can see inside here, there are 3 transfer ports, which are also completely open. If you compare them to this, you have one on this side and one on that side. They're just 2 ports in and out. And also the exhaust and inlet ports are super big in comparison to this one. So hopefully this gets us a bit more power. We also have a bit higher compression cylinder head that should fit on here nicely. Looks great. And some other bits and pieces to restore this engine, also the piston. But that's for later. You have two brand new bearings in here. They are a different type. These should be better than the original ones. This one is for the crankshaft, and this one should be for the housing in here. So it's been a couple hours. These things are pretty cold. Let's see if we can get this first one in. Woo! Yes, that's the first one in. That's the easiest one. This is my mother's clay oven, which I have been using for another project. I'm going to put the bearing in and maybe get it to 30 or 40 degrees. Not too much because of the seal. I don't want to hit it with fire because that would ruin the seal on the bearing. So just going to wait a couple minutes for this to have some temperature and then put it on the crankshaft. It's not too bad. It's on. Maybe let's try and go ahead and actually fit it in the crankcase. If we heat this thing up. All right, let's try to fit this. Woo! It's in. God, I love it when that works. Just some basic physics. I'm actually going to keep everything in this position to let everything settle back down to its normal temperature. Because, for example, if I put it back up and the crankshaft shifts even half a millimeter back out and then settles, well, then we have a problem. So put this thing like this. I'm going to store it in the vise and let everything get back to temperature. There we go. That's a crankshaft with a new bearing. So we're getting a bit closer to a assembled engine again. On to the next thing. So a quick little tip of something I forgot is to put this spacer back in before putting the crankshaft in the crankcase. So now I'll just have to put this thing in right here, but it will be a bit difficult, more difficult, because the crankshaft is in the case. So same thing, just heat this thing up and push it on. Yeah, it's in. So next up is the roller, but before we do that, just one more thing I want to do now before I forget. That's these little retainer clips to hold in this spacer or washer or however you want to call it. I will try to put it back in the original place, which was around here. Not sure if that matters or not. So got these new screws. These should be the same because the old ones are a bit mangled up. This came in a kit, which is a bearing retainer or spacer or however you want to call it for the newer type, but the screws should be the same. So there's a little lip on these screws, and I think these have to go in these little tabs here, but they don't match up. I think this is for locking the screws in. So what I'm actually going to do Let's take this one back out a bit and add some Loctite. There you go, nice and tight. Now the other one. There we go. Make sure screws are in completely so the crankshaft doesn't snag. Perfect. Next up is the roller. So I actually found this pretty helpful. Adding another block of wood. Then you put the crank pin on the top side, and then you can rest the engine on this block of wood, which is pretty nice. So this goes first. Align the tabs. Boom. Perhaps I have to redo this trick with a longer bolt in here so I can lock the crankshaft for tightening the nut. That should be fine. Now we can get this one back out and the original back in so we don't forget this one. I've also added a new copper washer because this is directly connected to the crankcase. So if you have a air leak here, the bike won't run or the engine won't run. Next up should be the ignition housing, and this has to go on like this. This bigger hole is for the spark plug wire, so make sure you don't put it on the other way around. Oh wait, whoa. Still need to add the cap. Wow. Okay. I kind of still need to push this down more. But how am I going to do that? Kind of need to push this down so this gap is closed. So I need something. So what I'm going to try and do is use these bolts to push it down. Just bit by bit, some left, some right. Hey, look at that. Just a tiny bit more. There we go. The roller is slightly catching on the bit there, I think. Maybe just loosen it up a tiny bit. Or just remove these. Ha! Nice. Perfect. So there you go, little trick to get this ignition housing back on. So let's continue onward with the ignition system. Let's install this little, what should we call it, swipe thing. This is used to clean up the not the crankshaft, but the inner piece of the flywheel. With the cam on it, that activates the points. So let's take the cleanest side and just put it back in. Let's put the capacitor in. This is the old one. Not sure if it's bad or not, but it's a €2 or €3 piece, so it doesn't really matter. And then the points system. So this is the holder for the longer part here. Oh. So this is 2 pieces. So the big piece goes first onto the holder piece, and then this little plate with another point on it goes in the back, or at least that's how I found them. I hope this is the correct way. This to help them spring back, maybe? Not sure. I think these should be isolated. So a paper or some plastic washer and then the regular washers. There we go. And then, well, I was looking at my ignition system because these don't line up. And guess what? Oh, guess what? I can't hold parts. No, there are different types. Shook. Maybe we can rescue this one. Let's see if we can first rescue this this point. Can't call it points because it's just singular. Let's try cleaning it and hopefully it still works. So to get this spark plug wire elbow in, you have to mount it first and then put the ignition cover back on. So if you're watching this video, you know beforehand, don't forget, because there is no other way to get it in. There we go. Still rotates fine. Now let's put the coil back on. The first coil is back on. Now I will have to experiment with something to fit in here to mount to the back of this coil, because the spring that was in here to connect the coil with the actual screw of the spark plug wire is gone. So I have an idea, but I will have to do some testing. So this is a spring from a basic pen, and this fits in this hole. So what I'm going to do is try to solder in some copper wire on both ends to have as much contact surface as possible, and hopefully that fixes it. So I'm going to try and solder in some wire and mount this in here. So now we have some soldered in copper. I'm going to just grind the surfaces flat, or try to as much as I can, and then this should be awesome. Of course, adding the solder made it a bit wider, so I will have to grind some of the side to make it fit. All nice and flat. And now we can install the second coil. Just give it a little push into the right place. And that should be it, I think. Yeah, let's try it like this. So when we get this engine installed, there is no way to adjust the pre-ignition or the ignition timing. You can only adjust the gap that the points make, and that also adjusts the timing a bit. If they open further, they open earlier, and vice versa. Forgot the capacitor link. There we go. Let's also just give it a quick clean. And then this one. There, that's the ignition back together. Now we can basically put the engine back on the bike and go from there. I still need to order this retainer clip that I broke off with the impact. This one over here. This has a little tab that slots into this hole here. As you can see, I broke it off accidentally because I didn't know it had a tab, and therefore I need a new one. So with the ignition system complete, I wanted to do a quick test. So I remounted the flywheel. Look at that. I don't know if you saw that, but we had some spark. Perfect. So as you can see, the bottom end of the engine is back on the bike. It's assembled apart from this retainer clip. I will reinstall that later on. So that will probably be it for this episode. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about the top end, talk about the cylinder, the differences between the original one and the triple port. And then we'll have a look, install these, have a look at the ports timing, if everything is okay. And hopefully we can maybe give it a little test fire. We'll see. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing for more, and see you in the next one.